Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for this episode. My guest this week is Abby Glassenberg. She's the president and co founder of Craft Industry Alliance. She started off on Etsy, but she's done so much more between when she started and now. So I'm really glad to have her on the podcast. Abby's been featured in publications like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and she's also been a featured teacher at Creative Live, where she taught a course on email marketing, which, if you've listened to the podcast, you probably know that is one of the weak points that I think is common to all of us. But we're going to talk about not just Etsy and email marketing, but the bigger picture of what Abby is doing within and for the crafting industry. So, Abby, thank you so much for being my guest and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting to be here.
I'm so glad to have you too because I did a little background reading on you. Well, not like stalking, but just so I could have an informed conversation with you. And I'm so impressed by all you've done. And you've been around the crafting industry for a while. I know I mentioned the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, but you've done so much more. So can you please give us some background about you and your career in this field and how you got to this point of founding and presiding over Craft Industry Alliance?
Sure. Yeah. I was always a maker and a person who really enjoyed crafting as a kid. My mom was always somebody who got us new boxes of crayons and all the art supplies that we wanted. And I took art classes after school and things like that. I learned to sew in eighth grade home economics class in public school. I was terrible at it, but I thought it was very cool that you could make something that was sort of real that you could wear or like really use. So I kind of saw the potential in sewing. I bought a sewing machine when I was 13 after that class, but I didn't really know how to use it very well. We just had that one, session in eighth grade and like that unit, and my mom didn't sew and my grandmother didn't sew, so I was kind of left on my own. And as anyone who has a sewing machine knows, it's so easy to get the bobbin tangled or just not
Yeah,
thread it right, and it doesn't work, and you don't know how to read a pattern. So I didn't get super far beyond making like hair scrunchies and things like that, but I liked it. So anyway, I was always, making all kinds of different things. I did polymer clay and origami, just everything like that. And then I became a teacher. I became, that's what I was a history major undergrad at Johns Hopkins. And then I did Teach for America, which is a program where you are placed in an under resourced public school. So I went to the Mississippi Delta and I taught middle school for 2 years. I had very crafty roommates. So we had a lot of fun. And then after that, I came up to the Boston area to go to Harvard to get my master's degree in education, and then worked as a teacher, worked in a nonprofit, et cetera, and got married. And my plan was always, even since childhood, to be a stay-at-home mom. I always wanted to be a mother. That was always my goal. And so when we had our first daughter in 2004, I decided to stay home with her and to leave the classroom. I was teaching sixth grade social studies at that time. And so that was great. She was born in March, and then by the winter I was like, "Oh gosh, like what have I done?" I left my career that I've been training for, that I've done, done all this work, um and I like being a mom, but like I need something else. And that was kind of surprising to me. And right at that same time, blogs sort of emerged and became something.
of
And
course.
so I found craft blogs. I had read about blogging in the New York Times, and I thought, oh, there must be craft blogs. So I looked because I, really enjoyed crafting still as an adult. And I found a few and kind of got involved in like Flickr communities and commenting on blogs and things like that. And I went out with my husband for date night, and it was raining. We were at a Starbucks that was inside of a Barnes and Noble. And I said, I think I could have one of those blogs. I could do that, while our daughter Roxanne is napping. I'm making all these different things, I think I could do it. And so he was like, well, what would you call it? And I said, well, how about while she's napping? And so I wrote that out on a napkin and it looked like while she's snapping. And I was like, no, I'll just call it while she naps. So that was really the origin of my blog. Of course, in 2005, when I started it, I had no intention of it being a business. I think, blogging as a business, it just wasn't even something on people's radars, even at that time, which is why it had that kind of mommy blog name. And anyway, so Etsy actually launched that summer. And so in July of 2005, I opened an Etsy shop because I had started sewing, really learning, how to sew. I would take my daughter to story time at the library, and after story time was over, I would push her in the stroller in the elevator. We'd go upstairs to the where the adult books were, and I would find the craft book section and take out these craft books that were from like the late 60s, early 70s, like really out of date books, but they were about sewing stuffed animals and dolls, which is what I really like to make. And so I bring them home and sew the different patterns and read them and then try making things and try making my own patterns. And so by that summer, I had some patterns that were my own and I had way too many stuffed animals in my house. And so I was very excited to be able to sell online for the very first time because, I had a blog on TypePad. And I certainly did not have a background in coding or development for the
Yeah,
web. And so when Etsy came along, I was like, wow, with a click of a few buttons, I can just sell something online. Like that was e-commerce was still kind of new.
yeah,
So that was great. It was like really revolutionary. I remember uploading a listing, it took 5 screens. So you would write like some information, then you go to the next screen, write more. That now it's all on one screen, but it was really onerous to do.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I took like terrible photos. I didn't have an iPhone or anything like that, of course. I took photos with like a digital camera and they were like really blurry, poorly lit and terrible. So anyway, but that I was kind of in business, pretty early on. And so that was a great adventure. And it provided, that adult interaction with the blogger friends,
right.
and you have to pack up the orders and source supplies. And it kind of gave my brain like another thing to focus on in addition to being a mom. And so it was perfect. I could stay at home, nurse, do all that stuff, and do this.
Yeah.
Um, and so I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. I really learned how to sew finally. um, and that was kind of the very beginning. And I kept blogging. I blogged all the way through many years. I only recently kind of dialed it back. So I've had that blog for a very long time, and I still have that same Etsy shop, by the way.
You
So
do?
yes, and I still sell on Etsy, same shop. I sell supplies now instead of finished, finished dolls and toys, but I sell sewing patterns that I designed for dolls and toys and supplies to make them. So yeah, it's really the same thing. But through that whole process of blogging, a lot of wonderful things happened. And I got to write some books, which was really cool, and do some licensing and really start to learn about the business side of craft. So it really all originated with that first Etsy shop.
Hmm. That is so much. And I didn't know that you still had your original Etsy shop. When you said you were still selling on Etsy, I thought, okay, maybe along, as the years have gone along, maybe you've opened other stores, went away and came back, but you stuck with it through the long haul.
One thing about my personality, I will say, is that when I commit to something, I just keep going. And I think in some ways it can kind of wear me down. But in other ways, it is, I think persistence is probably a good trait to have. And so you're right. I mean, I've never had a break in that shop. I've always just continually sold things since 2005 in that same store. Yep.
So in that case, I think, Abby, that you're qualified, more than most or more than many to speak on this. You, over the course of that's now 17 years, have seen all the changes Etsy has gone through. And I commend you for not being the type of seller who leaves in a huff because something changed. How have you weathered all the changes on Etsy and are still thriving on the platform?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's been fascinating and sometimes really frustrating
Yeah,
to ride out all the different changes over which there have been so many over the years. And in the different CEOs, I mean, there's been a lot of it's really changed. And when the company went public, when they changed the definition of handmade to include production partners, I mean, there's been so many things.
yeah,
Um, so I guess my feeling is when I look at what the crafts industry would be like if we didn't have Etsy, right? If
yeah,
Etsy wasn't in existence at all, if it had never come into existence, if Rob had never come up with this idea and pursued it,
mhm,
or if it had just fizzled, if he hadn't taken venture capital and wasn't able to get money to start and
yeah,
grow, and it never happened, right? Or if it just went away one day. Where would we be? And when I look at it that way, I really can see the value.
mhm,
We've got, I mean, for better or for worse, and one can say we, meaning makers, but it also, of course, includes quite a few people who aren't makers at this point who sell on Etsy. All of that being said, we do have this incredible marketplace that's like a wind in our sails, really. And it's a household name. You've got Amazon and eBay and
mhm,
Etsy, and everyone knows what it is.
yeah,
And it really functions well. It's rarely down. It's very simple to do, make a listing. It's very simple to buy something. It's really optimized in so many ways that requires huge investments. So when I think about it and what it could be, if it was poorly done, or what it could be if it what life could be like if it didn't exist at all, I see its value and I stick it out. And on the
yeah,
other side of it, I feel like the worst thing to do would be to say, I am Etsy. I am an Etsy seller. My identity is tied up as a business with Etsy. That I would never recommend. I think it's a channel. It's an interesting one. It's a marketplace, which is different from selling, on your own e-commerce website.
yeah,
It's got advantages. I just would never recommend that being it if you really want to build a business for the long term.
yeah,
So when they do make changes, you don't take them so personally. You have other outlets, other income sources that you're pursuing, and it's just one. And so that way you have some distance, professional distance from
yeah,
Etsy.
yeah. And I agree with you. I'm of the same mindset. I host this podcast, but I've never been one to say it's Etsy or nothing. And many times I've said you can't put all your eggs in one basket. It's a great platform and it's a good place to be, but you have to take it for what it is. And you're I think sometimes the mistake people make is not realizing or not approaching what they're doing as a business of their own. And then you kind of get confused when things like when change comes and it's not your business. You're reminded Etsy is not your business, it's a tool.
Yeah,
So yeah.
very, very sage advice.
Did you ever dabble in e-commerce off of Etsy, like trying to, or actually building uh, an e-commerce shop for yourself in addition to selling on the Etsy marketplace?
Yeah, so I have to remember back when it was. It was, 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there. I don't have the exact year on me, but I did a blog redesign. So I mentioned I was on TypePad and I was very
Yeah.
frustrated with it, and I hired somebody to make me a WordPress blog. And that was great. So, I have my own domain, walshynaps.com, and had this WordPress blog. And as part of that, she built out a WooCommerce e-commerce store.
Oh,
So
wow.
not Shopify, it was WooCommerce, which is less expensive. It's a little
Yeah.
more fiddly, I guess. And but she built it out for me and she taught me how to use it so I could, do everything that I needed to do, all the updates and things like that myself.
Mhm.
And so I have had that e-commerce site for a long time now. And when I would write blog posts, let's say I developed a new pattern or wanted to do a tutorial about a sewing technique, I would show those photos and write the text and things and then link to the pattern in my own WooCommerce shop. So not sending, as soon as I had that, I didn't send any more traffic to Etsy from me. All of it went to my e-commerce shop. And as a result of that, from blogging for 15 years or so, I still get lots of sales from that shop because it's got great search engine optimization and people find it on Pinterest, my tutorials, and come over and it all links to that shop. So and it still also drives traffic to my Etsy shop. I have like a little Etsy kind of collage or whatever on the right sidebar, and so I get lots of hits to my Etsy shop also from that blog. I think just blogging for so long, it was really helpful, and yeah, so I do still have it and still get orders from it probably every. And I got one today, so almost every day at least.
There's that your persistence again that has paid off for you.
I
And
guess so.
yeah, yeah, no, really, and especially in the online world, um, Google does reward websites that have longevity and that are stable and are constantly producing content. And I think sometimes creators, we get impatient too quickly and don't hang around long enough to reap the benefits. And just what I'm getting so far from your story is stick with it. It's not always going to be easy. It's not, you're not always going to see or be happy with everything. Like WooCommerce, I'm familiar with WooCommerce, and it's definitely not as sleek as Shopify, but it works and it's worked for you all these years. And so it's that persistence that I think, sometimes impatience gets the better of us.
Yeah, I think, one of the tricks to sticking with blogging, if we're just focusing on that piece,
Mhm.
since it is a great driver of e-commerce sales for so long, is really that it fulfilled a need in me, beyond just the audience and comments, and this is even before social media, but then after social media shares, and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
The content that I was putting there, it fulfilled my own personal creative, desires. And so I I got a lot of satisfaction from it, whether anybody was reading it or not. So, for many years, for example, 2007, 8, 9, I was sewing soft sculpture birds. So I kind of got really into making birds and made all these different species of birds, figured out wire legs and balance and feathers and all kinds of things. And I just would make these birds because I really enjoyed making them. And then I would show them on the blog and talk about the process and things like that. And as a result of that, I got a book deal to write my first book, which was called The Artful Bird, which came out with Interweave in 2011. And it
Wow.
was literally just me doing what I thought was interesting. And after that book came out, I wrote a second book, which is called Stuffed Animals from Concept to Construction, which was about how to design your own stuffed animal patterns. And honestly, that was because I searched the bookstore and couldn't find that book. And I kept thinking, where is this book that's going to teach me how to design my own patterns? And it wasn't there. And I would look online, do Google searches. And again, the amount of content was just so sparse. And so I
Yeah.
thought, well, I'll teach people. And it's that book really started with a blog series where I would show you how to make different kinds of darts, and it
Yeah.
led to a book deal. So I explored that for a long time. After that book came out, I honestly got really interested in the business side of craft and was writing about book contracts because I just, signed two and they were really different because my second book came out with Sterling, totally different publisher than Interweave. And I didn't have an agent, so I negotiated those contracts myself with the help of a lawyer. It was really interesting. And in talking to some friends I had made through blogging, everyone's deal was different. And so started thinking, oh gosh, that's interesting. And nobody's talking about this. So I started to write about those sorts of issues, industry issues, and interview people, call people up and interview them and write articles, kind of like a journalist. And so I
Yeah.
allowed my blog to change, is what I'm saying. So I was persistent, yes, but I wasn't like rigid, if that makes sense. So like what I was interested in pursuing in 2006 was not the same thing I was interested in pursuing in 2014. And I didn't let that make it so I had to start over or, make a new blog because the old
Yeah.
blog is no, I just kept going and figured some of my audience will be like, and I did have a few people email me and I miss the stuffed animal patterns.
Oh,
And I said, okay, well, there's other people doing that now. This is what I'm doing now. And I'm sorry you miss it. They were fun, but I'm doing this now and I'm just keep marching, So I think
yeah.
allowing yourself to change while still being persistent is really helpful.
Wow, I love that. Yes, I, I'll admit I'm one to not walk away, but when my interests change, to start afresh. But I see now there's wisdom in just pivoting with where you are already, and whoever comes along with you, and whoever you lose along the way, I guess you lose along the way.
Yeah, because if I were to keep serving the old
Yeah,
folks, I wouldn't serve anyone because I would have quit because
yeah,
I didn't want to do that anymore. And it's, one of the things, right, we have to remember about working for ourselves is there is no boss. So no one's going to say, no, you can't do that. You can do that. Go ahead. Like that's one of the, isn't that supposed to be something that we really enjoy
yeah,
about being self-employed in this way as a creative is that you can make those decisions
yeah,
for yourself.
absolutely. And speaking of going after what you want to do and filling needs, because it seems to be a common thread in your career path, is filling a need that you didn't see. Can we talk about Craft Industry Alliance? How did that come to be, and who does it exist for?
Sure. So, as I said, I was writing business related content on my blog. And I have to say, like, I would call people up to do an interview, and they would say, well, where is this, who are you with? And I would say, well, she
Mhm.
naps. And it sounded kind of not very business related. And so I knew there was kind of a mismatch there. I had started a newsletter. Everybody, I'm sure you hear this all the time tells you you should do email marketing. It's so important. And for
Yeah,
years, I was like, yeah, yeah, I have a blog. I don't need an email newsletter. And then finally one day, and like, I guess halfway through 2013, I was like, okay, fine, I'll just try it. And so I kind of experimented for a little while and then landed on writing a newsletter that was a roundup of craft industry news of the week. So I did a
Mhm.
lot of reading every week and I found the industry to be really interesting. And so nobody was like collecting all the interesting things that happened that week. mergers and acquisitions and trends and all kinds. There's always news in the industry, and
Wow.
so I would round them up and put them in my newsletter. And that list really began to grow. I had something like 7,000 people on that list. And when you would look through who they were, they were the owners of fabric companies, and they were thread company executives. They were like all these big people. And that was pretty cool. And so I had that going. And at the same time, I was writing about Etsy, of course, because Etsy is a big part of our business, as we all agree. And when they changed their definition of handmade, which I referenced earlier, prior to this moment, I believe it was in 2013, maybe, or yeah, they had said, you have to be a maker, just you. And then they said, no, you can have production partners. So if you want to hire a screen printer to print your t-shirts, that's also handmade.
Mhm.
And they did like an open house kind of thing online, and you could come and watch. And so I watched it, and they made the announcement, and they asked, answered questions and things like that. And I thought it was so interesting. And Chad Dickerson, who was the CEO at that time, he was
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
call.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I wrote an article for my blog all about it and covering it basically. And someone from Etsy reached out to me and said, we read your article. It's interesting. We'd love to talk to you more about it.
Mhm.
And I said to my husband, I'm like, I don't really need to talk to her because, like, I already saw the whole thing. I said, but I said, if we could record that conversation and I could post a recording, that would be cool. And so I decided to just ask her. I was like, there's no way she's going to say yes. But I decided I'll just ask her. And if she says no, fine. And if she says yes, great. And she said yes. So
Wow.
this is Vanessa Bertozzi, who used to work at Etsy. And so I didn't have a way to record audio. I didn't have I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a microphone and nothing. So I just used the mic in my Mac, and I got audio host really quick.
Yeah.
And I asked her permission, and she said yes. So we recorded the conversation, and I put it up on my blog as an MP3 that you, you could like listen to. And 8,000 people listened to it in the first 24 hours. And I was
Wow.
like, "Oh, wow, that is so cool." Um, and so I thought, "All right, maybe I can do some audio interviews." And so I started calling, different industry players and saying, "Can I interview you and post the recording?" And so
Mhm.
then by January of 2014, I was like, I have a podcast.
That's
so so I started I got theme music, I got a microphone, I made a schedule, and I
good.
figured out the format, I got serious about it. And so I started the podcast, and I would include that in the newsletter. It was really helpful. As you know, you talk to so many interesting people. It's great.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had someone on my podcast, Kristen Link from the blog Sew Mama Sew. So she was a sewing blogger like me. She had a really big popular blog, and we had a great conversation. And a few months later, she called me and said, do you want to start a craft business conference with me? And I had 3 kids at that point, and I was like, "I cannot travel, like, So I don't go anywhere. So I was like, but at that same moment when she got in touch, I had been thinking about turning my newsletter into a paid newsletter, like a business to business paid newsletter. It was
Nice.
not easy to do back then. There was no Substack. This is just like, how am I gonna do this with MailChimp, basically? So I was looking into doing that. And so I told her that. And so we started brainstorming and thought, well, maybe we can create a trade association for the industry that would be different from anything that's existed before. And we started talking to a lot of people about this idea, in the people in the crafts industry and people outside of the crafts industry who were members of trade associations in different industries, to ask them what's valuable in a trade association. And so that was the genesis of Craft Industry Alliance. And we started working on it in 2014,
Mhm.
and we spent about 10 months building the site. and we launched in October of 2015 as a new kind of trade association for the industry that didn't revolve around a trade show. So, there are other trade associations, or there were at that time. The Craft and Hobby Association existed at that time, the National Needle Arts Association, we had Quilt Market, but they were all really based on a trade show. And we decided no trade show for us. We are going to provide all the great stuff you get at the trade show, but online and all year round so it's accessible to everyone. And so that was really the concept. And it was really successful right away, right when we launched. We each put in $5,000 to build the website, get the logo, hosting, all the stuff that you need. We
Wow.
made up that investment on day one. So that was a good sign.
Wow.
And it's really just grown, from there. It's hard to believe it's going to be 7 years in the fall. So
Wow. So you didn't have to do, well, not that you didn't have to do, but was most of the marketing done because you both had audiences already? So you had a ready group of people to talk to about this, and then that helped it really take off.
absolutely. So I had my 7,000 people who were,
Mhm.
and that was a B2B list, meaning, it was business to business
Yeah.
on my list. And she had a really popular blog. Like she would have like a million page views a month. It was a contributor blog, so it was like all different tutorials from tons of people, and so it was really popular. She had one of the first online fabric shops, and this was the blog that accompanied it. And she had closed the fabric shop but kept the blog, and so she had like an email list of like 40,000 people. It was really big. So you're
Wow.
correct. Like we had an existing audience. That being said, her email list was a lot of consumers who weren't going to be interested in something like this.
Yeah.
And we were both coming from a very small sector of the crafts industry, right? So she was coming from quilting. Stuffed animals, let me tell you, very few people make them. It's not some sort of booming part of the industry. It's there, but it's a
Yeah.
sideline. Um, so those were the people that we knew. I knew all the doll makers and she knew all the quilters, but there are so many other people in this industry from, knitting, crochet, cross stitch, needlepoint, and that's just fiber, weaving and spinning, but also paper crafts and jewelry and polymer clay and ceramics and woodworking. There's so much more. And, we didn't know any of those people. So we did have existing lists. And that
Mhm.
was really helpful that we had both built over a decade prior to launch,
Wow.
but we only were able to reach at launch a very small sector of the overall industry.
So how did it grow?
Well, good question. It grew in a lot of different ways. Primarily, I would say through articles. One of the things that we were really dedicated to right from the start was having a news site. So, we have articles on that site that are written by journalists and freelancers that we pay. Paying people was always really important to us from the beginning. Everyone who works for us, if you write an article or you conduct a webinar, et cetera, we pay you because there's so much, as you know, in this industry that people do that's unpaid. And we really
Yeah.
wanted that to not be the case for us.
Yeah.
Um, so we have articles in there. I write for the site, and we also hire people to write for the site about all kinds of industry news. So I'll just give you an example. Bead and Button is a trade show for the beading and jewelry
I
beaders.
love, I love the
Um,
magazine.
it's in Milwaukee and it closed. It closed in the summer, I want to say, of 2020, partially due to the pandemic, but partially due to it was, declining for a while. Well, let's
Mm,
just the folks who really loved that show and who look forward to seeing all their friends every summer in Milwaukee were
yeah.
devastated. Well, we wrote an article about it and interviewed all the players, interviewed people and their feelings about it, wrote the history of it and why it's closing, etc. It's the only article about it. So when you go to register for Beat and Button, even now, if you haven't heard the news and you're like, what happened to the show? And you Google it, our article comes up first. And so you go there, you read, oh, that's what happened. And, that's the kind of news that we cover. We take what happens in the crafts industry seriously and cover it in a serious way. All sorts of industries have a business to business trade magazine, and
Yes.
craft really didn't. So that's something that really, it's kind of the top of the funnel, I would say. It brings people in, then they get a pop up asking if they want to subscribe to our newsletter. And our newsletter, by the way, and podcast are ported over from Walsh and Apps. So I still write that roundup of craft industry news of the week. Been writing it every week since the middle of 2013. And it's now the Craft Industry Alliance newsletter, which people can get for free. Um, and I still have the podcast. We just moved all, at that point, it was like 120 episodes or something over to the Craft Industry Alliance website. And so I'm still, still doing the podcast too. But that's really how it grew, is through content, really good quality content that other people weren't doing, weren't covering.
Yeah.
Um, and then, we host live events. So every month we host a webinar taught by an industry expert. And, in our newsletter, we have a little section called member exclusive. So that piece of it, if you want to attend the live event, for example, you can only attend if you're a member. And we have a bunch of things like that. We have discounts, we have a bunch of other things that you only get if you are a member. And so at some point, a lot of people will get attracted by one of those things and say, well, it's not an expensive organization to join. We wanted to make sure we always kept our prices reasonable, even for businesses of one like me who have an Etsy shop. And so they might come over and say, well, I really want to go to this webinar about TikTok or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's worth my $59 and I'm gonna join, and then I'll be able to use these other services as well.
And did you say all the all the live sessions are only webinars? You don't do like an annual conference?
So we do webinars, which are, yeah, I mean, they're all virtual. So those are, an educational piece each month that's taught by an industry expert. It's kind of like PowerPoint slides, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we also do the Craft Business Roundtable, which is a monthly meetup on Zoom, of our members. We just had it this week, and it's the first Tuesday of the month, and we talk about what's happening in the industry and in our businesses. So that is really valuable. We have a lot of people from all different sectors who attend that meeting every month, and you kind of get the pulse of what's going on. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. I think it's really interesting. But yes, that's also virtual. We don't have, at least up until now, we can talk in a minute about what's coming up, but we have not had any kind of real, in-person portion of Craft Industry Alliance. It really is a virtual digital association.
Okay. So it sounds like that was intentional. It wasn't because of the pandemic or anything. It was always your intent to do that. And I assume that was so you could reach a larger audience, or not reach, but so people who didn't have the ability to travel would still have access to.
Absolutely. I mean, I was one of those people. I have my oldest daughter has some special needs.
Mm.
I then had another child 2 years later, and then another 4 years after that. So I was really not
Traveling was
able to
tricky.
travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, myself. I went to Craftcation in 2015, and it was like the most exciting
Yeah.
moment of my life. So I hadn't been out of the house in a long time. So definitely, as far as access is concerned, we have members all over the world. We have a lot of members in Australia and Canada, UK, Germany, and actually we had a member from South Africa who was on our call this week. So we do have members all over the world, and it is great,
Yeah.
to be able to connect virtually. And we were doing Zoom long before the pandemic came along, so that was kind of funny for us. But yeah, the other piece of it So I should say Kristen, my business partner, she had some things that she was doing in her own life, and so she left the business in 2019 in May. So I bought out her 50% share of Craft Industry Alliance. So I ended up sort of accidentally, I guess, becoming the president, which was not my intention, but is the way things are, at least for now.
Yeah.
And I will say people came to us over the years, and then to me, just myself, with different ideas for events. We could do a small group 1 day conference. We actually did one in New York to try that out. We could do a more expensive kind of retreat kind of setting. What would that be like?
Mm,
So people came to us with a bunch of different ideas, and I honestly felt like I'm very busy doing doing all the things that the organization require now. I'm not a great party planner at all. I'm not a great party goer. Like I'm just like I'm a very introverted person by nature. And so I was like, I don't have the skills to really plan a great event. And none of these ideas really match with what we offer. So I thought at some point, we'll have an event because it makes sense to see people in person. I do love seeing people in person. The craftcation when I went and quilt
mm,
market I've been to several times. Nothing beats it. And those friendships, I mean, I value them so much. So I knew we would try something, but I also knew it would need to be outsourced, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. So is that where H&H comes in?
Yeah, so H&H Cologne, which some folks who are listening might know about, is a beautiful fiber focused trade show in Germany. And it's been going on for a long time now, and it's really big and very that the booths are big. They all have hard walls. There's a
Wow.
fashion show. There's all kinds of inspiring displays, and a lot of the, really nice retailers from the US, like Pearl Soho, they
Mhm.
go to Cologne to buy because it's
Wow.
really the premier trade show, even though it's in Europe, for the US too, because it's so big. And because it's in Europe, you got vendors and exhibitors from all over the world,
Yeah.
mills and folks from, India and Turkey and China and just everyone. And it's fascinating. So people really enjoy going to Cologne. And I had been in touch with them over the years. Writing articles like about it, how to get ready for it, how you might
Mhm.
get some funding to go, things like that,
Yeah.
explaining it to people in the US who might be interested or intrigued. So I had been in touch with them before, and actually, my employee was planning to go in 2020. And of course, it was in March, so that didn't
Well,
happen. But
right.
anyway, so we had kind of a pre-existing, cordial relationship. And then last summer, so summer of 2021, Darren Stern, who's their business manager in the US, came to me and said, H&H wants to expand into the American market, and we want to do a show here. And Craft Industry Alliance is the right strategic partner for this show.
Wow.
Because at this point, we have 1,930 members. We have our email list now is more like 16,000 or something. So we have more, we've got a good presence.
Yeah.
Some of the trade shows had closed. TNA had closed. That's the National Needle Arts Association, which is like kind of the knitting and yarn trade show, had
Okay.
closed. And then Creativation, which is what became the Craft and Hobby Association show, had closed. It merged with another organization, and so there was kind of a hole in the market. And here's the nice thing about this arrangement, which is that H&H, they're owned by Colin Mesa, which is a organization in Germany that owns lots and lots of shows and lots of other areas. So they have a garden trade show and they have a tools trade
Oh,
show and a tire show and all these different shows. And craft is just one. And so they know what they're doing when it comes to putting on a trade show. And they were willing to handle all of that. Right. So it was perfect because our role as strategic partner was to help spread the word and also to plan the educational content. So the
right.
classes, the business classes that you would take at the show. And that's something we plan all the time.
Right.
So, and as a teacher, I feel really comfortable with that piece. And so I thought, this is it. This is the right partnership. So I said yes.
That's great because that's right up your alley, at least the portion that you're going to be handling. So, what's the show called and when can we look out for it? How can listeners get connected if they want to attend this show?
Sure. So it's called H&H Americas, and that was intentional to invite, people from Central and South America as well as from Canada.
Oh, nice.
Um, it's in Chicago at the Rosemont Convention Center, and it's June this year. It's June 22nd to 24th,
Mhm.
and of 2022. So tickets are on sale now. You can go and buy one. They are, I believe, $55. If you're a Craft Industry Alliance member, you get a free ticket,
Mhm.
and you can then register for the classes that you want to take. And you can see the floor plan with all the different exhibitors that are going to be there. It is, I should clarify that it is to the trade, which means that you need to have a business in
Yeah.
the crafts industry in order to attend this show. And honestly, a business can be an Etsy shop for sure. So if
Mhm.
you buy fabric in order to make your product, then that's great. You're a business, please come.
Come on.
Same, yeah. If you're a designer and you design crochet sweaters, you are an industry professional and absolutely very welcome to come. So it's very inclusive. If you're a YouTuber and you do instructional videos about crafting, you are in the business and you are welcome to come. Cast a wide net, but you do need to be a professional in the industry.
Okay.
It is not for consumers.
Okay. And does one prove that they're professional by showing a business license when you register or like a resale certificate to show that you are incorporated? How do you vet?
It's not vetted. So if you want to come and pay the fee and come in, you're welcome to. It is to the trade, so you're not going to be able to write orders and things like that unless you have a wholesale license. But yeah, that's basically it's an honor system.
Okay, I like this. So there will be education and then there will be the opportunity to link up with vendors. So if you want to make new connections, like get new suppliers, this is the place to come. This is the place to
Yes.
be.
And
Yeah.
if you think about it, it's so efficient.
Yeah.
Of course, you can do this kind of research on Google. You can
Mhm.
also discover interesting brands on Instagram. We all do, every day. But if you think about the efficiency of actually being in one place where everybody is and being able to walk around and talk to
Yeah.
everybody all in 2 days, the show opens Thursday morning. So it's Thursday and Friday. It's
Mhm.
incredibly efficient. And in my experience from going to Quilt Market, as I said earlier, the connections that you make in person like that,
Mhm.
they are so strong
Yeah.
and so valuable. Plus, the ability to actually touch everything yourself and
Yeah.
because it's H&H, there's going to be quite a few international exhibitors. So a lot of those exhibitors who came to Cologne want to enter the American market. And so for them, this is the opportunity to come to the
Right.
US and introduce their notions, their yarn, their fabric, their sewing machines, all of that to the US market. So there's going to be quite a few things that you haven't seen before, maybe, unless you're super attuned, to what's happening internationally. So I also think that that joy of discovery is just such a positive piece of being at a trade show.
Yeah, this sounds really exciting because I enjoy trade shows so much, and you're so right. The way you connect with people is so different than when you're not in the same space, and when you're talking face to face and interacting. There's so much more nuance to the connections that you build that way. Is there a separate website that folks can go to register for that, or can they do that on the Craft Industry Alliance website?
So yes, there's on H&H America's website, and I can give you
Yeah,
the link for that to put in the show notes.
yeah,
But you can also
please.
Google H Americas, and you'll find it. And that's where you go to actually, buy a ticket and register for your classes and all of that stuff. But if you are a Craft Industry Alliance member, then we offer a lot of different discounts on Pro Tools, like shipping and stickers and travel and things like that.
Mm.
And on our discounts page, you'll find the H&H Americas link that will give you your free ticket. So you can kind of come through us if you're a member, or
Yeah,
you can go straight to the H&H website if you're not a member. Yeah.
okay. And Abby, can you give that person listening who maybe has never subscribed to an industry organization in the past, one reason why becoming a part of the Craft Industry Alliance will be beneficial to them and their business?
I would say it just saves you so much time and hassle because we can all Google and
Mm.
watch YouTube videos and try to understand certain things, like you're trying to select, the right label printer or, how to do payroll or, there's so many questions. Do I need insurance if I'm teaching classes out of my home? I
Mhm.
mean, if you start thinking about it, it's a lot to learn. And yeah, we can Google and try to find free content that's out there. But if you join an association like this one, number one, we've got a lot of archives of interesting information that is specifically applicable to you and your business, from articles to downloads to webinars, recorded webinars. We have mastermind groups, all kinds of things like that, but we also have a very active Facebook group that's just for members. And when you're in there, you know that, you've got people who have years and years of professional experience. And it's specifically in the crafts industry. So they know what you're talking about
Yeah,
and they know the brands and they, they can we share a lot of sourcing. For example, sourcing is so hard. We have sourcing lists, and people often are like, I'm looking for this certain kind of grosgrain ribbon. Where do I get it? And people are like, oh, I bought it here. So it's just very tailored to you, and you're going to get the answers that you actually need quickly and expertly. And I think that's worth a lot.
that is worth a lot. I mean, just the time saved and the curation of the collective wisdom of others,
Right.
it's worth it. What's the best way folks can connect with you if they want to follow up or just see what you're doing and learn even more about Craft Industry Alliance?
Okay, two ways. One, I would suggest subscribing to our newsletter. It's right on our homepage, craftindustryalliance.org. And it's free. So it's a good way to get a taste and, without a lot of commitment. If it's not for you, you can always unsubscribe, no problem. So that's a good way to kind of get a taste and a flavor of what we're offering. And you're always welcome to reach out to me, and my email is at the bottom of our website, but you can just also email me at Abby, that's ABBY, at craftindustryalliance.org, and I'd love to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'm so glad to have had you on the podcast. Thank you for coming and sharing about this resource, and just what the benefit is to not just Etsy sellers, but people who run their creative businesses. And also, thank you for sharing your story. I honestly am inspired by what you've done and what you've accomplished over the years. And um, if there's one thing I take away from this conversation, it's stick with it. Just stick with it, because that's my weakness, is giving up right before something happens. So thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I did too. And I thank you for listening to the podcast. I will be back with another episode next week. If you would like to support the podcast, please go to convome.com/support, and you will be able to do it there. And I will be back with another episode next week.